something that you did that not a lot do, I didn't do it, so I think it needs to be acknowledged today, back to just owner-occupied, living at home development style. In the earlier years, if they like this space and this game, what they'll do, including myself, they'll go and live in a property, they'll know it's tax-free, they'll get excited by that, they'll develop it, but they won't follow the feasibility development process. They'll just do it because they lived in it and they wanted to add some flair to it, and then they'll sell it and they'll make 100 grand or 150 and they'll go, cool, I made some tax-free money, I'm keen to do that again. I think the thing that you did a little bit different to the norm, which is fair to say, is you still put a feasibility and return lens on these properties that you were working with. It wasn't just capital growth premised. It was, no, I'm going to go in, I'm going to look at an end buyer. I'm going to live in it, yes. I'm going to get my wife's taste, right? But then I'm going to sell it at a good margin. And then that was all tax-free. That's something that I think you did very well that got your capital stack to build really quickly in those earlier years.
All right, so me and Ryan are back here again. It's good to see the people are watching. We had someone write into us and ask if we can talk more about your taxes and your benefits of, in your entities, companies, trusts, personal names, I guess, and all the implications you can get in either one, or the benefits you can get in either one. So we're lucky enough to have a brilliant accountant here already on the panel.
Andrew, you're a brilliant
Big
accountant.
Rhino. So, yeah, I don't know, kick it off, Rhino, and just give us a bit of an intro and, I guess, taxes around developments.
Yeah, so there's it's a pretty broad topic area, is taxes around developing, but we'll try and nut out as much as we can and get the basics in our time together today. What I'll do is I'll frame up, I suppose, the importance. So you've got, like you said, you've got your personal name, which has respective taxes, and there's a lot of benefits in your personal name, okay, especially in your earlier years. So lots and lots of benefits there, which I think we need to open up and talk about.
Definitely.
Secondly, as you start to do, bigger developments and take it more seriously, in the eyes of the ATO, but also in the eyes of the funder, you need to start to transition over to corporate entities. So companies, unit trusts, et cetera, which you naturally use. And then there's a future state. So let's call it, you're a developer, you've been doing it, you know what you're doing, you're at your level. You can start to get really strategic with taxes and kind of do a bit of both.
Mix it up a bit.
Because you can present to the ATO, or you can present to funders that, well, over here I do developments and over here I flip homes, which you're allowed to do. I invest in long-standing property like Airbnbs, etc., and you can structure tax effectively to do that. So there's kind of a couple of buckets, and there's usually a bit of a timeline with the buckets. That's how they work. So if you were starting out, you'd gravitate towards your own name. If you were doing this quite methodically, you would have to use corporate entities, etc. And then when you really got some traction in terms of like multiple projects and you've been doing this, you can hover in and out of both.
So I guess elaborate a bit on that in obviously the way I've structured it before and now with you and all that sort of stuff. Just touching on starting out, obviously when you start out flipping houses, you're generally living in them. You don't need the entity at that time to be doing it on the outside, because that's where you can make some good capital by living in them and getting a bit of growth while you're renovating yourself or getting your hands dirty in your own name. It might be taking two years because you haven't got a full team there, so doing it in your own name, so you're getting the growth in the property at the same time while you're living in it. Then it's becoming your owner-occupier home, and then you can sell it tax-free. So massive benefit, especially when starting out. You want to be trying to get as much capital as you can. As you know, like if you do one, and then you move into entities, you do one now, you could be losing up to 50%. By the time you pay your GSTs and your taxes. I'll be right, wouldn't I, Ryan? Roughly, if you make $1 million, you're probably going to give away 500, right?
Yeah, look,
Close to.
Like if you don't structure yourself right, absolutely. Like if you structure yourself in a very average way, for example, like let's say you got a company at 25%.
Yep.
And you've got two shareholders in that company, and they're both taking out profits of like 500K in 1 year through a unit trust, then the tax is through the roof, right? And so you've got to be creative. But yeah, back to the point, owner occupied, like you said, or principal place of residence, it's a tax haven, you know what I mean, for an early developer.
It's one of the only things I think probably in the world now that you can sell without taxes.
You can, and the thing is, and this is something we'll open up a little bit, is when you're doing your first couple of homes, a lot of this is around storytelling as well, okay? Because the ATO, when they start to sniff that you're trying to make a profit, okay, they label you a developer pretty quickly, and they'll treat you as a business, right? That's how it works. But in your earlier years, because like you said, capital's key, and it takes some time to build capital. If you're buying a house, renovating it, staying in it for some time, selling it, moving on to the next, and it's clear that these are homes, but you're just making them better for your living standard, they're tax-free. Like, period. Tax-free. So you don't have a 25% tax. You don't have a 50% tax. You don't have
GST.
You don't have GST. You don't have anything that sometimes, in your earlier years, you can get stamp duty exemptions. Like, it becomes very good for you to get up.
100%.
For you to get ahead up.
It's definitely a good way to get. Obviously, it's a slower process because you're generally doing it on your own, or you're living in them, so you can't go hammer and tongs. Especially if you got a little family in there, which we did the same. I did it for a long time. Flipping was probably flipped longer than what I've been developing, and it was fun. It's good fun. But yeah, so many tax perks, which is good. But I do believe moving forward that like you were saying before, you got to try and mix it up. Whether you're bouncing around in your own developments and living in them for the time that you need to live in them, and then you might be doing other ones in entities. When we were having a meeting the other day, you spoke about saying there's a new law now that even if it is your name, but it's on owner occupier, you still pay GST. So
yeah,
what was that?
Yeah. It's pretty much new residential buildings. So like if you have a what you said is right, it's not a home, so it's an investment, right? And you go and you do the investment. You're not a developer, which we'll talk about that in a second. But let's say you go in there to develop this thing more as an investor, okay? So it's like an Airbnb or a hold strategy, and it's brand new, okay? Technically, you've got to pay GST on that unless you can wait a 5-year timeline. So if you wait 5 years, so if you Airbnb it for 5 years, GST's gone. But if you sell it for 5 years,
isn't it?
100%. There's something I wanted to revert back to, which you mentioned before with the PPR. Something that you did that not a lot do. I didn't do it, so I think it needs to be acknowledged today. Back to just this owner-occupied, living at home development style. In the earlier years, if they like this space and this game, what they'll do, including myself, they'll go and live in a property. They'll know it's tax-free. They'll get excited by that. They'll develop it, but they won't follow the feasibility development process. They'll just do it because they lived in it and they wanted to add some flair to it, and then they'll sell it and they'll make $100,000 or $150,000 and they'll go, cool, I made some tax-free money. I'm keen to do that again. I think the thing that you did a little bit different to the norm, which is fair to say, is you still put a feasibility and return lens on these properties you were working with. It wasn't just capital growth premised. It was, no, I'm going to go in, I'm going to look at an end buyer, I'm going to live in it, yes, I'm going to get my wife's taste, right? But then I'm going to sell it at a good margin. And then that was all tax-free. That's something that I think you did very well that got your capital stack to build really quickly in those earlier years. So I might just get you to talk about that quickly before we start moving into other structures.
So yeah, no, you're probably right on that because I just love property that much. I think I got my first one at 21, I think it was 20 or 21, something like that. I always still looked at it as sort of still in a development eye, even though I wasn't developing then, but I was like, right, if I buy this here, I still studied the areas and I knew sort of where I wanted to buy houses and flip. Obviously the first one was in Yamina because that's where I was brought up. But then after I did obviously a lot over in in McMaster's Beach and all that sort of stuff, a bit more exclusive areas. But I still looked at these properties and thought, all right, I can get that. If I can get that for this price and I can sell it for that at the end, then I'm going to do it. You know, but I'm still going to probably know that I'm going to be sitting in there for 2 or 3 years, renovating it, doing a lot of the work myself. Because at the end of the day, yes, time is money, but at the end of the day, you're not paying the money when you're putting your time in your own development. So yes, I still always looked at it as what profit am I going to make out of it, and who will the buyer be? And I never sort of did the house up for myself because I knew it was realistically never going to be mine. Right? I always knew I was going to unsell it, so I tried to design it in a way. And like I said before, I used to do all my own designs and give it to a drafty. But I used to try and design it in a way that that would be tasteful for at least 70% of the market out there. Yep. I still use that strategy, and I thought, this is how much it's going to cost me to do the renovation or the flip, and this is what I want to make out of it, and most of those ones back then, like seriously, by the time you had a bit of growth in it, probably were pulling 500 to 800K, after holding it for 3 or so years. Most of those ones make good money, and that's tax free. And then you roll that into the next
Correct.
one, and you go again, and you roll that into the next one. So yeah, and even playing the game like we've mentioned before about running out of money for the construction, because you just use your own money, and then refinancing or getting equity out because you've done 3/4 of the build, and then getting it again. So I still looked at it that way. I think, if you want to move down this path, I think you need to learn that way.
100%.
Because at the end of the day, you want to be getting maximum profits at the end of it.
Exactly. And that's why I just needed to tie off that point, because I just see it so often. I see it so often where you've got a builder, or you've got a person that wants to become a developer, and what they're doing is they're just like, wow, this is tax free, so let's clutch onto that. And it's like, tax is a part of the dollar. Like, give or take, it's 25%, it's zero in this case, but what you've got to look at is that end return, and then the tax is the juice. It's like the cream. It's the benefit. It's the final benefit. So,
well, you're going to roll into these other ones, and it's not going to be like that.
Yeah,
that's the thing. And I learnt that pretty quickly on the first one that was in a company. There's got to be more meat in it at the end of the day. Yeah, and otherwise you just walk away with just clean slate.
Yeah, and if you can get into the habits of meat when it is tax free, when you've got the best chance to really build that juicy capital, it's good habit to get into, and I saw that you got into that. So something that we want to touch on before we move on around this, like owner occupied, living in your home tax free, is there's a lot of misconception in that as well. A lot think that you have to hold that property for 12 months before you can have the owner occupied status.
And what is it really?
It's 6 months. It's 6 months.
Which is a big difference.
You got to understand your buckets. Like if you developed or built whatever the property as an investment, okay, to get a capital gains discount, it's 12 months, okay, which means you take your profit and you bring it down to 50%, not developer, just investor, right? But if you live in the home and you're in there for 6 months living in there, you can sell it tax free. So it becomes quite a good little, and then there's even more, there's things that I wasn't even brought up to speed with, that apparently you got this 6 month window, but you've also got, like, if you're moving from property to other property or home to other home, you've got like an overlap period of a couple of months where you can keep both properties as your home.
In your transition sort of period.
In your transition. So you got like this 6 month here, then you've got this overlap period when you can hold both properties tax free, and then you can have this extra 6 months. So it becomes quite good if you're strategic on the end return, the tax free nature, to end up like really getting ahead. Really getting your capital ahead.
Well, that's what we sort of did. There was probably a stage when we were younger, we had a fair few properties sort of there, and they were all renting out, and they were all, lucky enough, they were all actually making money in rent, which is quite rare on the Central Coast. Our yields are pretty average, to be honest, in rental. And then what we did is we just lived in them to really get the capital quick, instead of having to look for a home, then design. We pretty much were designing most of them, and then lived in this one, finished it, sold it, moved, kicked the tenant out, moved in that one, renovated it, finished it, sold it, kicked the tenant out, moved it. And there was a point where we had 4 or 5 maybe, and just end up cleaning the whole plate of it and finish them off. And that's sort of when, we bought the property we always wanted, that we're still in now, and then use the rest of the funds to just go, right, it's time to time to do the build development model and move into, and then once you're sort of doing that, you've got no choice. You can't live in 5 homes at once. So you've got to move into that entity space, start a company, and then that's what I mean, touching more on that. I get a lot of conversation about the benefits, trusts. People used to do a lot of developments in trusts. I feel like people are steering away from that now. Obviously, having your trusts sitting at the bottom, floating around, and sitting at the bottom of your entities. But back in the day, a lot of people used to develop in trust, but now it seems like they're pulling back to just the company now. And I was just wondering if you could touch on what are the benefits between doing it in a trust and doing it in a company, because it seems like now the company route is the way to go.
There's 2 optimal development entities. There's a company, so a PTY Limited, company up here. Then there's a unit trust up here. Company's benefits are that it develops the property, it pays the tax. Now that tax is 25%, so it's not 50%, never will be. It's 25%. That's the corporate rate. It pays its tax, and then you can flow out dividends to the investors over as many years as you like. So if those individuals like yourself are making heaps of money, they're at like 50 cents in the dollar tax rate, you're slowing the dividend release. So you're not hitting high individual tax rates, but the corporate tax rate's capped at 25, which is quite beneficial in the big scheme of things. So companies are becoming very beneficial for that reason. A unit trust over here does a development. It has to release the profits to the shareholders or unit holders
in a certain time.
In that development year, as soon as that profit's realised, meaning if you're at 50 cents in the dollar, you're getting whammed with that tax right there, right? But then again, just to add a little bit of...
But what would the initial tax rate be in that unit?
Nothing. Zero. So there's nothing. It comes completely down to the unit holders, right? Now, if you've got, for example, and this is common practice, a family trust down here that can have discretionary capability or flexibility, let's call it, to split off to multiple individuals or even other companies, you can reduce the tax rate that way, which is where you can play good with unit trust. But yeah, again, to your point, companies just have that, like it's a lower tax rate and it gives you time to work out. But the unit trust structured right gives you time as well. So they both can work.
So if you wanted to pull out money within that development year, not dribble, what would the best one to be still in a company?
Yeah, I reckon.
It's cleaner.
You pay the tax and then you dribble it how you want to dribble it. Yeah.
And that's generally how we set ours up. Well, Ryan sets all ours up now. We're saying we'll have the company. Generally, all developments will have their own company. We never do one in one company. And then you'll have your family trust, as Ryan was saying before, with family members sitting through it. Yeah. And that'll float around and bounce around the bottom of and own certain amount of units or shares in the company or the unit trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we feel that that's definitely the best way to do it. But as mentioned before, it comes to a point where I think you do need to, even talking to these older guys now that I meet, and you still need to be a bit mixed up and diversify a little bit. And I'm even in the conversation now that maybe we just, do whatever with our property and that we love, and, it could be just holiday, let it or rent it out, and then maybe bounce around for a while in these developments, and make them your owner occupiers, because you've got to try and, I guess, contain or keep as much profits as you can. That's the whole point of the game, isn't it? Realistically, is to try and make as much profits as you can. And that'll be, but plain and simple, the taxes and the GST will always be the biggest chunk that gets taken away from your profit.
And this is a really important conversation now, because this is what gets a lot of people confused. When you've got these different properties you're doing, you've got your home, or you've got your developments, which you're doing, e.g. in a company. You've also got this other bucket, okay, which I briefly touched on before, which is an investor bucket.
Yep.
You as an investor. So Justin has his home, which is tax-free, which he's really methodical about with the end return. Justin has his development company or companies, which he's doing these amazing, triple M model developments and above. Then Justin has his investor properties, right, which is properties that he develops, which he holds for hypothetically 5 years, whereby he doesn't even pay, like if you did this in your own name, right, and your tax rate based on our structuring was, let's just say it was an average of 30%. Well, because you're an investor here, not a developer, because you're creating properties for you and your family to hold and rent out, luxury accommodation, whatever it may be, when you sell that property, if you sell that property, you get a 50% discount on what you sell it for based on the profit, which means your tax rate could go down to 15% based on the 50%. So you got to be careful that if you've got more of a hold strategy on some of your developments, which you're naturally gravitating towards, that is not a development. It's not a development by the ATO's nature. It's an investor. You're an investor in this property for a hold strategy, just like you're holding a property for 10 years.
And what would you say is, I guess, the best structure to hold those investor properties in? Personal name, companies, trust. What do you reckon over that side? What would you hold them in? Like if you were having,
here's the thing.
Holding or holiday letting, what would you generally have it in? If you're
sometimes can be okay in your own name. Sometimes can be okay in joint names between you and your wife, hypothetically. Can be very good, believe it or not, based on our prior conversation, even in a unit trust. Okay. Because if the unit trust holds it and the unit trust is owned by the family trust, the capital gain, because capital gains apply here, because remember, it's investor, not developer. Developer's business, right? Investor is on capital gain. Your capital gain comes through to your beneficiaries, and then you get the discount of 50%, right? So the unit trust becomes quite advantageous to hold these protected, investment properties in there. So you've got to be able to distinguish between capital gains, which is you as an investor, which is you getting discounts, etc. And then if you're a developer in a company which is flipping for a profit, right, it doesn't get that same 50% discount. So again, you've got to be able to isolate these things. Home, developments, investor on capital gains account. They're different. And you got to play. And like I said, as you get good, you got to start playing these because they've all got a massive tax impact.
It's funny though. People don't realize how all these, I guess, different models of developing or investing, how important it is to have the structure in those individual, I guess, scenarios, how important it is to have that right. Do you know what I mean? Because if you've got a few of them, your tax implications can be huge, So, and as you know, like I've got, the trust, and I've got even this properties in this commercial one, because I know I'm going to keep it for probably ever, give it to the kids or whatever. But I think the ones that you do keep is good to keep in them ones. They're obviously protected as well.
That's a good point. Like if you don't mind me talking a little bit, I won't go too detailed. Where we're sitting right now, and I know your affairs are always fun, mate. So even sometimes I get confused, but I'm quite confident this is in a family trust. Okay. That family trust, you sell it, it's coming straight through to the beneficiaries and you're getting a discount for it, right? And so the tax is not 25% in a company. Give or take, it's going to be around 12, 13, something like that once you blend it out. So you're doing it. Like if I can use your example again, this is in the trust. It's the hold strategy that's on capital gains tax account because it's an investment, not a development. It's not a flip. Then you've got your huge developments that you're doing in unit trusts or companies which you talked about, right? Which has got that set tax rate because it's not on capital gains, it's a business, it's a development business. And then you've got your homes, which you're methodical about, which are worth so much money because you've bought them strategically and not emotionally, and you've followed the same principles, but they're completely tax-free. Like that's the perfect example of you playing each of those buckets. You've got the home, you've got the developments, you've got the investments.
Well, the main thing is too, but I think no matter what you buy, like it depends what your path is, but I think no matter what you buy, you've really got to be smart. I always say it when you buy it, like super smart.
Great.
You got to go in and you got to buy it for the best possible. Like you can see what's happened in the last 5-year period, the growth pretty much around the whole of Australia, but particularly here, it was phenomenal. Like it was nuts. So, if you're buying something that's realistically 5 years ago, if you bought something that was $500,000 less than what you probably should have paid, that $500,000 has pretty much probably turned into $3 million. Do you know what I mean? In the last 5 years. So buying, being smart, don't just go in and go, I want this and pay. I mean, if you want to pay whatever, pay whatever. But I think, you still got to, no matter what you buy, you got to have a strategy. Like I always said to myself, in 5 or 10 years time, I want to make sure this thing's worth 5 or 10 times more.
Yeah, that's a good attitude.
No matter what you buy, I think it's silly if you just buy something and then 5 years later, you've been in it for that long and it's tax free and you sell it for the same price. So what's the fucking point of that?
Yeah.
Like, so
I think
always
something-
been.
That's why I raised the point before. That's something that you do really well. Like, you're very critical, and you won't just and that's something I've taken from you over the years, because I've gone and just bought stuff for the sake of buying stuff, right? And then I've always been open and honest about it. And I think that's the thing I've taken from you, is the critical nature of, don't just emotionally fall for something. Like, even with that auction we went to, right? Like that you know, I wanted it because I saw it.
Back.
Pulled it back, right? And then other properties that I've had, you know, developments that you've designed to do, like, and we pulled that back. Like, it's, you got to have the ROI. And I think it doesn't always have to be just, you know, I had a good conversation with a broker yesterday who does developments, and he does developments, but he doesn't do heaps of developing. He might do one at a time, right? And he's got this buyer's agent, and this buyer's agent goes and finds like really undervalued property based on things like being deceased estates, drug addicts living in them, like they're smashed to pieces. And his buyer's agent, who's very reputable, buys them like a couple of $100K under to realize quick equity to then be able to do like small flips and then on sell at like a couple of $100K. So it's like fabricated capital growth because it's just been so messed up. It doesn't matter how you do it. You just got to have that end in mind. How much money can I make from this? Whether it's tax-free or not tax-free, they're your principles you've got to adhere to before tax. It's more important. Feasibility is more important than tax.
It is. It's super important from the start to the end. Like, you've got to picture, like, I'll always picture the end. This is what we can sell it for, and then you've got to just bring it back and keep that gap at the end as big as you can. Right, and then, because it's always going to try and creep back on you, you try and maximize that at the end as much as you can. And even touching on, and I guess another thing about, I guess, you know, taxes and capital gains and all these sort of things, because obviously in an investment property or a development or a property that you're actually not living in, you know, there's always tax perks as well that you can get. Not only just talking about how much tax you got to pay, but there's also tax deductions you can get in them. People are going to realize one thing about a personal or your occupied home, there's none of that. There's no benefits whatsoever. That's why a lot of people say you shouldn't even have your own home, all right? But one of the things I think I would recommend if someone was to start out and flip, or maybe they hadn't have the family yet, because at the end of the day, you know, to be honest, if I didn't have a family, I probably wouldn't have a home, right? To be plain and simple. I just think it holds too much money. And unless you can release them funds with good servicing or a good job or whatever, you've got a lot of money contained and tied up in that, because you've got to put a fair bit in for for your deposits now. You've got to put a lot in for stamp duty. So you contain a lot of money. So and when you have that property, you don't get any tax perks from that property. You make nothing. You actually don't call it like it is an asset, but sometimes it become a liability as well. So I personally believe if you were younger and you didn't have a family, you didn't need that home, I'd be renting. And you want to be in the development path or the flipping path, jump in these homes, live in them, sell them, jump in them, live in them, sell them. Even when they get bigger, if they don't need a home, you can use that capital that goes into an owner-occupier home to do developments, right? And I've even thought about it a few times. Like, I remember one time I started to develop, I said, I'm just going to rent. And I'm going to keep this capital and make the capital for developments even more. So, yeah, it's funny that, like, you get all these, it's great when you sell, but they're not good to hold. Like, you don't get any benefits during the period. Whereas an investment or something like that, at the end of the day, you're not going to pay tax until you sell it. So, those developments and those investments, can be held and get good growth over time, you do not pay tax on them until they're sold. Simple.
Yeah. And I think there's servicing's an important point, but I think even if you've got this tax-free development home, we'll call it, that you're creating because it's tax-free and you can sell it, you can be smart as well. Like, based on what you said, you could have like a 6-month window or a 12-month window based on what we're talking about. Yeah. You could be renting. I'll give you a scenario. You're sitting there, you're renting. You're claiming half the rent. You're claiming half the rent in your business, right? Because you've got an office in there and blah, 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 blah. So you're renting, which is completely fine. Yep. You've got this.
I've done it.
Yeah, you've got this home that you're living in.
Yeah.
but you're not really. You're just developing it, right? Making it look beautiful, and you're doing it in your earlier years.
Yeah.
And then you sell that tax-free, but you're not locking up all that capital for years and years and years, because you've still got somewhere to live. Are you living with your parents, or you're living in a caravan?
Yeah.
But the point is, you've still got that tax-free development, right, because you're in your earlier years. So you can be quite strategic with how you do it.
Well, but I can tell you the amount of times we moved back into, my missus' parents' home when we were in the flipping stage at the start. Like,
It's still your home. That's still your home, right?
It's still my home.
That's still your tax-free home.
Bunking down at me in-laws, So yeah, that was a strategy that worked well, and we're lucky enough to have, a home to go back to whenever we need to. We've probably done that. We haven't done it with the kid, with our first kids when they were bubbers, you know. So yeah, you definitely got to do that. Like, you've got to, because there's times where you can't be in that home when it's renovated, especially if you've got a young baby or whatever. It gets to a point where you're like, I've got to get out.
Yeah, but you're right. It's funny. I've got a lot of your level builders as clients that they've got these like really valuable homes now. Like,
do nothing with them.
No, but they're selling them.
Yeah.
They're selling them tax-free to go into lesser value homes.
Yeah. And
just to do little tax-free developments.
Yeah.
So they've got more capital to do more developing.
Yeah.
So it's what you're trying to say, which I'm in agreement with, is you're trying to like keep your home flips small, so you're utilizing where your capital to do developing. And I see it time and time again. Literally, I've got 3 clients right now selling $10+ million properties tax-free, so that they've got enough capital and enough servicing and enough juice to keep going. Yeah. And then they'll just do a little flip on their home tax-free, bucketing it again.
It's like even with the property we got now, like sometimes the one that's with our owner occupier one, you still always have that urge to go, maybe, but when you got a family and stuff, it's a bit different. But you can go, I'm going to sell this, and it's going to be a good chunk for a certain amount of money. And because obviously at that time when we bought that one, I was like, in my head, I was like, we're selling this development and then we're going to go at rent. But then this thing popped up, and it was something we had to get. But it was a good play anyway. It worked out to be a good play. But you bulk so much money into these things, and then as long as you can release it with equity and get as much as you can out of it, that's fine. But if it's just sitting there and it's contained for so long, and you want to play in this field, you got to release that somehow.
Which is what we talked about before. No matter what you're doing, whether it's an investment, a development, or a home, you're always looking at from like an end return, the money you're going to make, either the fast market mover, like the good opportunity. And if it does that, home investment doesn't matter. It's going to keep building the value, building the equity for you to utilize. Now, in some instances, you might know the equity's been built, but the bank won't. And so that's when you need to consider selling to realize that capital to keep going. So again, the fundamentals are, it's always that end return. It's always that faster return, playing the tax game, but then being able to capitalize on that and not having all your eggs stuck in a
and understand as well, you will never be able to. So if you've got a lot of equity in a home, yes, you will be able to release it with a certain amount of servicing, but you will never ever be able to get the amount that you can when you sell it.
No way.
Because number one, the bank value is not the real estate agents are going to undervalue it a bit. So, and then they're going to always want to hold at least 20%. So you're never going to be, you might be able to get to 70% at max, maybe 60, 70, and then your service is going to pull you back. If you got $2 million there, you'll be lucky to access one of it. So it just depends which way you want to go about it, but it's definitely something that I think people should think about when they're in a flipping model or something like that home can contain a lot of.
And that's the final point I want to make. I think between these buckets we've talked about, the home, the developments, the investments, I think the important thing across the whole tax structure is timing, right? Because you need to, and I've had so many meetings around this, you can't just go and sell because you got to, because then you get screwed. You got to be able to have your cards and understand where the market's going, where the buyers are going, and being able to use your assets, right, for time. Yeah. So, for example, it's not being hell-bent on selling your home or selling the development or being pressed into it or selling the investment that was an Airbnb. It's about going, okay, cool. If I use my cards and there is a buyer that's so hot to buy my Airbnb, right, rather than me focus on the development being pressed to sell, I will sell the Airbnb, get my capital gains discount, blah, blah, blah. And then I've got more availability to sell this at the right price with the right strategy. And I think that flexibility across and not being hell-bent on what asset is being sold is the key, right? Is the key to real success in that end return. And then obviously you've already prepped for tax effectiveness across the group. So
one other last thing I'd like to touch on, I guess, before we finish up is other things I've learned, I guess, throughout the development period is obviously when you buy and do a development in a personal name, you don't get stung with the land tax that you have to pay. Whereas obviously when I first delved into business development, you'd get stung pretty heavily when you've got a development in a business name. And that can be, if it's a decent development, that can be 40K, 50K, right? I had a 100K one and you brought it down to whatever it needed to be because they got it wrong. Luckily, you picked that up. But do they do that land tax if it's in a unit trust? Is it the same?
Yeah,
Are your land tax similar to the same as a business?
Yeah,
because it's not personal.
They'll land tax you right through the pricks, unfortunately. Like they're going to land tax you straight through. They're going to land tax you.
So you're going to understand that there's more than just, say, in developments, you'll have, depending on how, and if you hold that development over multiple years, you're going to get this land tax every year.
Oh, yeah. And look, ballpark, off the top of my head, mate, ballpark, it's about $1 million, right? So you can, in an entity or in a name, you can hold in addition to your home. Your home's land tax exempt, right? Yeah. But if you had $1 million Airbnb over here, that's the land value of it. Anything over and above that, it's I think it's like a 1.6% charge plus a premium as well. Now, if you start banking up that, it's gonna hit you, which your point is critical. If we're always focusing on end return, you got to be factoring these into your feasibility studies. You have to, right? Because 40 or 50.
And my first one, I didn't. My first business one, I didn't. I was like, what's this tax? Just another one. So, people need to realize that obviously you've got GSTs, you've got taxes, you've got capital gains, and they can all be different. They can all vary in whatever structure it is. But then you're going to have land taxes if it's not in a personal name. And, there's all these other little... you got to make sure, and these aren't little chunks.
And you got to be
chunks that can, if you're making 200K profit and you get a 50K land tax,
it's a large,
and then you hold it into it and you roll through into, as you were talking about timing before, you got to be smart because every time you roll into a new year, a new financial year, it doesn't matter if it's the first day or the last day, it's going to hit you again.
Yeah.
So if you do a development through 23, 24, 25, you're going to get hit 3 times with land tax. So you got to be smart and make sure if you need to quickly get a sell, like the McGee one, we quickly sold before we rolled into another one. I think we sold in May, maybe, like finalised it and settled. Otherwise, if we hit June, we're rolling into another land tax that we have to pay. Sometimes you can negotiate it with the buyer, which we did, because if you roll through that period, you can say, well, I'm only going 1 month into 24. I'm going to pay 1 month. You need to pay the other. Depending on how they're buying it, you need to pay the other 11. So there is negotiating power that you can do with your solicitor through that part. But just be mindful that every year you're going to get stung with something.
Good point. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Anything else?
No, I think that was definitely jam packed.
Yep, nice.
It was very tax jam packed.
So hopefully, whoever wrote in for that one, hopefully. That helped in any way possible. But, if anyone else, we're getting a fair bit more traction, I feel, and people are writing in and asking to do stuff. So we're going to try and start bringing people on here soon. And, if there's any other topics you'd like us to talk about, because it helps us, we want to talk about what you guys want to listen to. And, it's good for us because we're still learning throughout it as well. So hit us up with any more, guys.
Yep, sounds perfect. Look forward to hearing what you need, and we'll definitely deliver. And we've got the networks and the people to deliver as well. So see you in the next one.
See yous.